My message is titled Faith Over Fear, and it's about the story of David. And this, what I'm going to be talking about is something that God's really put a focus on in my life. It's about courage and having faith and confidence in God and not so much in yourself. And we're mainly going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17, but before we get there, I want to start in chapter 16 to kind of get an introduction and kind of a background as to what's going on. So if you'll turn to 1 Samuel 16, we'll be reading verses 1 through 13. It says, "And the Lord said unto Samuel, How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil, and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, Take an heifer with thee, and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will shew thee what thou shalt do, and thou shalt anoint unto me him who I name unto thee. And Samuel did that to which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem, and the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, Comest thou peaceably? And he said, Peaceably, I come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourselves, and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons, and called them to the sacrifice. And it came to pass, when they were come, that he looked unto Eliab, and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. And then Jesse called Abinadab, and made him pass before Samuel, and he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Then Jesse made Shammah to pass by, and he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Again Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel, and Samuel said unto Jesse, The Lord hath not chosen these. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in. And he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. And Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. So basically what's going on here is God's sending Samuel to Jesse to find the king that God has chosen out of his sons. And Samuel's going through the list of his sons to see what God has to say about each of them. And as they're going through, as you'll notice, he was kind of judging them on their outside appearance. And then he is reminded that it's not necessarily about what you see on the outside, but it's the heart towards God that they have that really matters. And as they're going through, he's kind of almost in doubt as he goes through each one, and God keeps saying no. And then he gets towards the end, and he says, Is this all you have? And you can almost kind of sense him saying, like, well, there's David, but he just keeps the sheep. He's not really anything, you'd expect to be a king. But we'll see in chapter 17 more about David and his heart for the Lord and how God uses him. So if you look in chapter 17, we're going to be looking at pretty much the whole chapter, and then after we're done reading it, I'll just kind of break it down, and we'll kind of go over some key verses and key points that are brought up throughout. And chapter 17 says, Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and they were gathered together at Socha, hopefully I said that right, and which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Socha and Azekah, and the Ephistimim. And Saul said unto the men of Israel were gathered together, and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named the Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, and he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me, and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him, and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight each other. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons, and the man went among the men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle, and the names of his 3 sons that went unto battle were Eliab, and the firstborn, and the next unto him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul and to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah and of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. And carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And they came to the trench as the host was gathering forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper, and the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake unto the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is the uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why comest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thy heart, for thou hast come down that thou mightst seest the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner, and the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and sent for him. And David said unto Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Thou art not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing that he defied the armies of the living God. And David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put on a helmet of brass upon his head, also to be armed. him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he hath not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put him in the shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about, he saw David. He disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy and of fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves? But the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. And then David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and a spear, and with the shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the hosts of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not his sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine rose and came and drew nigh to meet David, and David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slung it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead. And the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with the stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until thou came unto the valley, into the gates of Ekron, and the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way so to Sharon, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, Inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine. Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said unto him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Whew, that was a lot. All right, so basically just kind of an outline of what's going on. The Philistines and the Israelites are getting ready to battle, one on one side of the hill, one on the other side, and there's just a valley in between the two. And Goliath is constantly coming out and confronting Israel and defying God, and pretty much kind of taunting them and mocking them, because he didn't really think they would have anyone that could match him physically and skill-wise, because as it says in the passage that Goliath was a man of war even as a child. He pretty much grew up around war and was very skilled in warfare. And so obviously David comes forth, and he's not really afraid of Goliath. He has a lot of confidence in God. As you can see, some of the men of Israel, they were kind of afraid of Goliath because they saw how big he was. They knew he was a man of war since he was a child, and they really didn't think they stood a chance. But you can actually see David kind of somewhat making light of Goliath. And as you can see, as we read, when he was taking care of the sheep, one of the sheep was taken by a lion and a bear. And David actually killed both of them. And as it says here, he grabbed the lion by the beard and pretty much punched it in the face. Yeah, it takes a lot of guts to do that. If it were me, I would, yeah, that sheep's gone. I ain't trying to do that. But yeah, he's using his past to help him now, because as he said, the Lord delivered him from the bear and the lion, so Goliath's going to be no different. And I think that's a kind of an idea we can apply to our daily lives ourselves. We might not ever have to kill a bear or a lion or fight a giant, but whenever we're facing an obstacle in our lives, we can look back and see what God has already got us through, and then we can have confidence that He'll do the same in this current situation. Having that kind of mindset can really relieve a lot of stress in our lives. We tend to worry about a lot of things, and really when it comes down to it, if God's going to take care of you in the past, and He takes care of all the animals throughout the earth and takes care of the small things, He's definitely going to take care of you. And we just need to have confidence and have faith that He'll see to it that we're provided for. So David goes out and confronts Goliath, and Goliath once again defies Israel and God. And David kind of warns him of what he's just done. He lets him know that you just defied the armies of the living God, and Goliath continues to mock him. And then, as Goliath said, he's going to kill David and pretty much feed his body to the animals of the wilderness. Then David corrects him by saying, you may have, your armor, sword, and shield and everything, but I have God, and that's more than enough to win this. And as you can tell, obviously, that David did end up winning with only just a sling and a rock versus a giant with, tons of armor on. He even had a shield bearer with him to protect him, and none of it was enough to protect him against God. So I guess a question we can ask ourselves is, what is God telling you to do? What's the purpose that God has called you to do? God's purpose for David was to confront Goliath and pretty much show everyone that it's not what's necessarily on the outside, but it's your heart towards God that matters. And verses in 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, it says, But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on the countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. So when we encounter our everyday problems and our obstacles, we see as man seeth. We see it from the outside, and we see the size of the obstacles ahead of us and the challenges, and a lot of times we can just defeat ourselves in our minds thinking, there's no way I can get over this. There's no way I have the ability or the talent or the skill to do what God has called me to do. But if we see things how the Lord sees them, it's not necessarily the size of the obstacle you should be worried about, but you should be more confident in the size of our God, because the size of our God makes our problems seem so minuscule. It almost is, when we get over those humps and obstacles, we kind of look back and wonder what we were even scared about in the first place. And I believe having that kind of faith in God, that you like having almost no fear at all of what's to lie ahead, will ultimately enhance our spiritual lives, because once we are comfortable with taking on whatever God has called us to do, just saying, here I am, I'll go do it. We may feel fear. Everyone feels fear from time to time, but I believe our reaction to fear and how we respond to it's what matters. And if we respond to it with a heart for God and faith in Him, that He'll carry us through, that we will eventually succeed and see the end of it. And I think through that we can accomplish things far greater than we could have ever imagined for ourselves. I believe God has plans for all of us, no matter how old or how young, and He can still use every single one of us. And we often think, like I said earlier, for me, like, I'm only 18, I can't do this, I'm too small, I can't do that, too slow, whatever the excuse may be, He can still use you. I mean, it doesn't matter. I obviously saw David, he was the last pick, and people doubted him. They said, well, he just keeps the sheep, he's the youngest, he's small, he can't be king, he can't fight Goliath, he can't do any of this. But David wasn't concerned about any of that because he knew that it wasn't him. It was God that was going to win in the end. So I challenge you to really pray and consider what God's putting on your heart. If you haven't already, just find some quiet time throughout the day. I know it's kind of hard nowadays, running around busy lives and everything, having to take care of everything. But if you can even take a few minutes out of your day and just quietly pray and read your Bible and just really ask God to put something on your heart, and He'll place a passion in you. And it might be scary at first, back in my sophomore year, I was really unsure about where I wanted to go with my future. I wasn't really sure what I was good at, what I had really that much interest in. And I remember I was given an opportunity to attend a school called Butler Tech for the criminal justice program. And honestly, I was very nervous about it because I would have to ultimately leave my school and go to a brand new environment 40 minutes away, have to meet new people, and I would have to take on a very physically demanding class. The homework was just going to be piled on me. I knew that, and I knew there was going to be a lot expected of me. And I was interviewed and selected for it. And one of the first things our commander taught us in the first few weeks when we were going over hand-to-hand combatants, there's this one phrase he mentioned that's always stuck with me. He said, "It's not about the size of the dog in the fight. It's about the size of the fight in the dog." And I think that's the same way here with David. It's not about his size on his outward appearance, but it's about his heart for God that ultimately led him to victory. And then the next question I guess we could ask ourselves is, what's holding us back from pursuing that passion and that desire that God's put inside us? We all have excuses of why not to do something. Excuses are always going to be there. We can't let those things stop us from what we think we can't do. Imagine if David had said, "I'm too small, I'd just take care of the sheep. I'm really not that special, I can't do much." Imagine what would have happened then. And I think a lot of times we defeat ourselves with that same mentality, I can't do this, I can't do that. And for the most part, we're right. We can't do it by ourselves. And David knew he wasn't by himself. Goliath saw just David, but David knew that God was right there with him, and he was going to win the fight. And the last and final question is, will you live by faith or will you live in fear? I think it's just a blatant decision we all have to make. We can either choose to live in faith and follow God even when the road ahead is unclear and you can't see all the way down the road, and you just got to take a leap of faith and trust that God will put the pieces together for you and will ultimately get you to where He wants you to be. Or we can choose to live in fear. Living in fear means that we let our excuses get to us. We ultimately sit around doing nothing, and we don't pursue the things God has set before us, and we don't trust Him enough to take those leaps of faith that are pretty much essential for our spiritual growth. So the main thing I hope you all take away from this is that it really does come down to a decision to either trust in God or to just be afraid of everything put before you. And I can tell you firsthand from many experiences in my life, when I was about 11 years old, I was diagnosed with a tumor, and I was obviously scared out of my mind being 11. I really had no idea what a tumor was. I was in the hospital that same day. There was a lot going on. It was very nerve-wracking, and there were even moments where I thought, I wasn't going to beat it. But I remember just seeing all the support I got from people I didn't even know saying they were praying for me. And I remember the next morning heading into surgery, I was at peace because, I just thought, no matter what happens, I have faith that God's going to carry me through this, and He did. And that's just a firsthand account from me personally of how, even when things are scary and you think there's no end in sight or you can't get through it, if you put your faith in God, He will get you through it, and He will use you to accomplish greater things than you could have ever imagined. So that's what I hope you all got from that. And I just want to let you know I'm praying for this church every day. I'm praying for the people in it and the prayer request, and I know that God's going to use us to do great things as long as we trust in Him and keep our faith in Him. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate your vulnerability too, giving personal examples about, God working in your life and giving you peace in difficulties. It's not easy to do at any age. I was really encouraged tonight, and one of the things that Zach said that one of the questions is, what is my reason or excuse that's keeping me from God using me for His glory? And boy, we can always come up with a mountain of excuses or reasons. And I'm challenged to be more like David and have that courage and that zeal for the Lord's glory. And that's what David's whole thing was all about. It wasn't the challenge necessarily that nobody could beat Goliath. It was the challenge that Goliath made against David's God. And, we can never go wrong when we desire the glory of God. And boy, so much there, Zach. I appreciate you bringing these things to our attention tonight. And I do trust that we'll consider what's been given to us tonight as we move forward. I know we all have things. If you don't have something right now, something's coming where we're going to need it, where we're going to need faith, and we're going to need courage. And so just another encouragement. Thank you, Zach, for that tonight. Let's pray. Father, we're grateful to be challenged from your word, Lord. What an encouragement it is to have the example of David, the young man who was picked last, and by all measurements he should have not even had a chance against the giant. And Lord, we think about how many opportunities and circumstances in our life where by all measurements we shouldn't have had a chance against whatever was in our life. But what they could not see, we sometimes choose not to see, and that's we have you. And so, Lord, I pray that you would give us a quiet confidence in you. And based on our confidence in you, God, that we would have courage. And that we would ultimately, in the middle of our circumstances, look for your glory. The end being your glory, and your name being magnified. Lord, I thank you for what we've heard tonight, and I pray that you'd bless Zach for the time and the effort that he put into this and for being willing to be a messenger. I pray that you would bless him in a special way, Lord. And I ask, God, that you would put a hedge of protection around him whenever a young man steps out in faith to serve you. Of course, the enemy's not going to enjoy that. So, Lord, I pray that you would bless Zach and help him, encourage him. And, Lord, I'd ask that you would help us each to take what we've learned tonight and let it be applied as we move forward in those overwhelming circumstances that we will have in our lives. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.